Here we are again, Jenna.
In my backyard.
In your backyard.
In my backyard. Actually, today we're at the Harris Center, which is in Hancock, New Hampshire. And Jody and I are here to talk about a whole lot of different things that the Harris Center does.
Right. The one topic that we're going to talk about this morning, though, is birding.
Birding.
And Eric Masterson from the Harris Center is going to be talking with us. And I think he's got a lot of information to share, and I think you guys are really going to enjoy this show. Right now, though, I'm behind the cameras, even though you can see me right here. So I'm going to shoot out, and Eric's going to come on in, and we'll get this show started.
Great.
See you in my backyard.
Okay, so today, Eric, it's nice to see you. So tell us what you do here at the Harris Center.
I am the land protection specialist. So we have between land that we own about 4,500 acres, and we have conservation easements on another 10,500 acres.
1,000 acres.
Yeah.
That amazes me because there are people in the Monadnock region that really don't know what the Harris Center is, and that's a huge amount of land.
It is. And so...
So are you the person that's in charge of sort of managing that land? Is that the idea?
Yeah, we have to, the land that we have under conservation easement, we have to monitor the easements to make sure that the terms of the easements don't build, don't do this, don't do that, basically, that we uphold the terms of the easements. And then the land that we own is obviously a significant responsibility, 4,500 acres in terms of blowdowns, beaver swamps, beavers flooding out roads and so forth. So I manage that.
And we're sitting today in the actual building, which is the center here, that you have education programs and all sorts of different things. So tell us a little bit about the history of this building and how the Harris Center even came to be.
Sure. Well, back in the 70s, in the early 70s, a woman called Eleanor Briggs, who has lived here, her family's lived here in Somerdeer for many, many years. She had seen what was happening to the south in New Jersey, Connecticut, New York, in terms of unfettered development, really making,
Huge impact
huge impact on the landscape. And she was very fearful that the same was going to happen to here unless action was taken. And she was in a position, her family owned quite a bit of land in the area, and she was in a position to make really a significant impact. So she basically, through the family's ownership of this property, we've since expanded. This is a new addition to the original house. But through their ownership of the original house and a lot of land in the area, they set up the Harris Center, and Meade Caddo was the first executive director. And from an initial 7 acres surrounding this house, it's grown over 30 years to the house and 15,000 acres.
Now, has this all been through private donation mostly, that the land was able to be acquired?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Well, Meade Caddo has a quote which I like. Non-profits don't have any money, they just spend other people's money.
Yeah, that's true.
So we don't have any money, we spend other people's money, and people who share our concern for the landscape, obviously through memberships and donations, and donations of land, donations of easements on land. So someone will keep the land but donate the easement, which is basically the right to develop, that will become extinguished in a conservation easement, and then we become the perpetual holder of that conservation easement.
And does that mean that you, I've always wondered, does that mean that as the Harris Center you can develop trails as long as it's in the agreement, or does it really depend on
absolutely.
a particular easement?
Yeah, an easement is a negotiation between a landowner and a land trust. It's not a government, nothing to do with the government. It's basically a private negotiation started by the landowner, because nothing happens without the landowner's wishes, first and foremost. They're the ones who make the decisions. And they will basically say, this is what I want my land, what I want to happen to my land. I want no development, or maybe I want to keep a house lot for my son or my daughter, and so you can reserve that out.
They can negotiate all that.
Yeah,
That's
they can
wonderful.
say, I don't want forestry, I do want forestry, I don't want this, I don't want that, and then it's a negotiation.
Oh, that's wonderful. And so that's how you've gotten all this other land
Most of it,
under
yes.
easement.
Yeah.
Now, while we've been sitting here this morning, we've heard various things, happening in the hallways. It's a busy place, and I've seen school kids on the property.
Yes.
And I know my own children go to school, and we have Harris Center educators come to them. But you also have a lot of students that come out here, correct?
Correct.
And what are mostly? I know there are a lot of programs that happen, particularly birds. I know we're talking about birds today. Do students come out here to learn about birds?
Yes, I mean, the Harris Center is basically 3 legs to the stool. Land protection is one. Education in the schools is another. It's a huge part of what the Harris Center does. And then a third leg of the stool is our adult education. And so we have a calendar of events that lists field trips virtually every week. Something's either going on out on the land or here in the centre. And so we do bring people out here on our land, because the Harris Centre is not a building. It's basically a building, a significant chunk of land, and also a way of life. It's what we teach and what we educate, and through our field trips and our programs. And so people come out here onto the land and partake in field trips. And we have a lot of experts that have various expertise in bees, bats, birds, fungi.
Teach different things.
Yes, yeah.
Now, as we sit here, and I can see birds coming to these bird feeders outside the windows. So was there originally a big interest in birding when the Harris Center was established, or was it a broad, stewardship sort of a thing, and then different things have cropped up with, maybe a real strong interest in birds, or a strong, interest in insect gardens? Has it just sort of developed over time, or did Eleanor Briggs say, I want not only the stewardship piece and the education, but let's really focus on forestry? I mean, did she have any?
Yeah, no, I would absolutely say birds were not the hook. I mean, birds are a hook for people because they're bright, they're colourful, they've got these amazing life histories, and so people get drawn into conservation and a concern for the environment through birds very often.
Mm-hmm.
But the Harris Centre's mission is a broader mission, which is basically, if you protect a forest for a particular species of birds, you're protecting the forest for everything that lives in it.
Exactly.
And so it's no harm to focus on birds to some extent, or to focus on those larger critters that are effectively an umbrella for all the other critters.
Well,
that live in
and
the
it's
forest.
interesting that you say the piece about birds being a hook, because I find that to be really definitely true. When I start thinking about, getting folks interested in nature, getting children interested in nature and protection, birds are one that students right away can relate to, because they've seen them in their backyard, literally, outside their window, or what it might be. So, and actually the educator that came to the Harris Center to my son's school was doing all birds this year, and he taught me a ton from what he had learned. So do you have a background in birds yourself?
I do. I studied I was one of those guys who got into, who basically sits before the cameras now as someone who's really concerned about the environment because of birds, because they were the conduit for me to get drawn into a concern for the environment and appreciation for the environment. First and foremost, it's an appreciation, and through that appreciation comes a concern.
Now, did you study ornithology yourself?
I did. I'm originally, if I haven't lost the accent completely, I'm originally from Ireland, and I studied ornithology in University College Dublin on the east coast of Ireland.
And then that interest eventually brought you to this position here, and I know you write, is it a column for the Monadnock Shopper?
Yes, so I write a column for the Monadnock Shopper every couple of weeks, and I've just finished a book on the birds of New Hampshire for University Press of New England.
And is that book for someone like myself who doesn't know as much about birds?
It's not. This is a Stokes guide. The Stokes Hancock is ground zero in New Hampshire for bird experts. The Stokes are well-known bird guide authors, and this is a guide to how to identify birds.
Okay.
The guide I'm writing is more. It has a lot of pictures and images, but it's more. How do I say it? It's what we have when we have it, and it's more prosaic.
I think that makes sense, because there are an awful lot of guides out there, and I have a couple of guides at my house that help me, and I would like to get more involved with learning about birds. So for the audience that might be interested in learning more about birding, you recommend this kind of the Stokes, the Lillian?
This is a terrific.
Donald Stokes.
Yes, this is a guide to the birds of the United States, and there's about 800 species in the U.S. So this will meet your needs no matter where you go in the U.S. New Hampshire has about 300 species that occur every year, and that's what I'm focusing on.
That's including the migratory birds, I assume? That's
including the migratory birds. There's about another 100. There's about 400 species have occurred in the history of the state, but 100 of those are like one-offs, two-offs. There's about 300 species, give or take, that occur every year. And so that's what I focus on in the book, where you can see them, what time of year, and it's about some of the wonderful life histories. For instance, there's a Arctic terns, which is in this book. It's a bird that breeds in North America. There's a few pairs breed off the coast of New Hampshire, and they head off down to the Antarctic. They have 2 summers basically. They breed in the Antarctic, and then they come up here and they nest. These are birds that have 2 summers. They winter off the Antarctic,
Okay.
which is basically summer down there. When it's winter up here,
They're down there in the
the
summer.
summer, and then they come back up here and breed up here in our summer. And there are many species like that, several in New Hampshire that have just these amazing life histories. And
And
that's
so
the
they
hook I'm
travel
talking about.
extremely far.
Yeah, they
I
travel.
mean, that's amazing.
Yeah, for 40,000 mile round trip.
There are some insects. I'm an entomologist, and so I often think about the insects that travel and the amazing stories of those insects that travel. And birds are so much more common that they travel because of their
Yes.
ability to travel farther than an insect ever could. And it's amazing to think, how long they can fly without feeding and things like that I've just heard about. And so if viewers wanted to learn more about birds, so a book like this, The Stokes Guide,
Yeah.
your book when it's out, which
Yeah.
is coming out when, do you know?
Spring of 2013.
Okay, so that'll be coming out. And then just in our own backyards, what can we do to learn a little bit more? A lot of folks have feeders. And
Yeah.
I've read, take your feeders in at certain times of year. So can you tell us a little bit about
Sure,
when it's best
yeah.
to have feeders out?
Well, birds don't need much help in the summer, and the cardinal rule is do no harm. So if you're not doing any harm, fine, keep feeding the birds. If in the winter when there's no food you're clearly doing good, that's a great time to feed the birds, especially in very, very harsh winters. What's not good is to be spotty in feeding the birds. So if they get used to a food source, and you forget to fill it every few weeks, that's not great. They either do it or don't do it so that they know there's a resource and they don't get lulled into a false sense of security. The other thing you want to do is make sure that you take the feeders down in late March before the bears come out, because you'll end up, feeders aren't cheap, and you'll end up out of pocket up to, if you lose your entire setup, that can be a couple of $100s. And secondly, you're habituating bears to a sense, you're creating an association between humans and food for bears.
Right, and that's dangerous for them.
And that's dangerous for them. And you'll end up, the worst case scenario is someone will get injured or the bear will have to be shot. And then
So we take the feeders down March.
Yes.
And then put them back up.
Late March. Put them
Okay.
back up in, fall is a time of abundance. Again, there's no harm in feeding the birds in fall,
Right.
they don't need it, but you're safe putting the feeders up in late fall, late October,
Okay.
early November.
And it's-
The bears are not starving at that. When they wake up in the spring, they're
They're-
seriously depleted. In the fall, they're fine, so they're less likely to harass your bird feeders.
Okay, so we put them up in the fall, and now I see so many different kinds of bird seed at the stores. I see,
Yeah.
and there's the suet feeders, and there's these black oil sunflower seeds. How does one know? Does it depend on what kind of species you want to attract to your yard?
Yes. So different birds eat different foods, obviously, and so there's the choice of food, and there's also the placement of food. So sparrows like to feed on the ground, and if you want to attract sparrows, you'll scatter seed on the ground in addition to the stuff that falls off the bird feeder. Some finches that have smaller billed finches like goldfinches and siskins and redpolls, they prefer the smaller thistle and Niger seeds that are more suited to the size bill they have for cracking. So Niger, thistle, there's the same seed, there's two names for the same seed. For goldfinches, siskins and redpolls. For a lot of other birds, sunflower seed is fine.
Now, is this sort of information in a guide like the Stokes Guide?
I don't know if there's some guides. I'm not sure if the Stokes talks about bird
Okay,
feeding.
but folks can go to the bookstore and check out different guides to say, okay, if I'd like to attract a variety of types of birds to my yard, what sorts of things should I buy? And there might be a guide that might tell you that.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah.
And it's interesting because there was one year, years ago, when my kids were still in preschool, and we kept a list that every winter what we had seen, and we had a guide right by the window, and we would sit and write down all the different birds we had seen.
Yes.
And we didn't see that huge a variety. We live right in town in Keene.
Yeah.
And I wonder now, I bet we didn't have enough variety of foods. And that could have been part of it, right?
Possibly. I mean, there are some foods like the corn tends to, corn's good for turkeys, but it's not great for smaller birds. A lot of the mixes have things like millet, and there is a variety. The mixes come with a variety of different seed types, some of which aren't they're just fillers really. The birds aren't that crazy for them. But also, cover is really important. So you want to have nearby cover so that the birds, they feel a sense of security.
Oh, I
If
see.
a hawk comes in, they can dive into cover.
That's interesting you say that, because we have our feeder, we have only one tree on our small lot in Keene, and that tree is sort of right exposed. And
Yeah.
we tend to put that's the only place to hang the feeder. And really, it is quite exposed. And there are other places off of our property that there are quite a lot of pine trees.
Yes.
And maybe if we could put something closer to those, that might attract more
Yeah.
species then.
Yeah, it will give the birds a greater sense of security as they venture out to feed, that they have some retreat
Okay.
in case a hawk or human or whatever comes.
Come some sort of threat.
Some threat, yeah.
And is there any rule of thumb in terms of how often one should take the feeder down once a week in the winter, clean it, or can we just sort of keep refilling? And
I keep refilling, but if the food is drawn down on a regular basis, clean the feeders once every couple of months. But if it doesn't get drawn down and you're left with the bottom third that's basically
sort of packed in there.
yeah, and so you're filling the top 2/3 and the bottom third, you get a mold situation, and some of those situations create bacteria and fungal infections that can be damaging for birds.
Well, and I imagine as well, if the birds can detect that sort of a smell or that sort of an distasteful type of feed, they might choose to go somewhere else entirely for a while, do they? Or?
Well, all I can say is that some years there is a real problem with transmission of infectious diseases at bird feeders amongst birds. And so there's no question that it happens. Whether they can smell, I mean, most birds don't have a sense of smell, but whether they
See, I
can,
just learned something.
whether they can taste or whatever.
Detect it somehow, right.
I don't know the answer to that, but I do know that it's that
Transmission of
is a
illness.
problem.
Interesting.
And so definitely, if you have some years when we get huge invasions of winter finches,
Mm-hmm.
they just pile onto the feeders and they're pooping, and it's really unsanitary, and there's a large mortality rate sometimes in some years like that, and maybe in years like that it might be just best not to fill
Not
feeders.
to feed. So as we sit here, and again, I'm watching all these birds out the window right
Yeah.
behind you, so if I keep looking over there, that's why. So in terms of folks figuring out how to start, is getting a feeder sort of one of the best ways to start learning about birds, or is it to come out to a place like the Harris Center and take some classes, maybe learn a little bit from people like yourself or experts that come here, take a hike with a bird book? What would you recommend would be the first way to really start learning?
Well, birds are everywhere, so you don't have to come to the Harris Center. You just walk outside your yard and there's going to be crows and gulls and doves and so forth. And there's very few birds that don't have some fascinating aspect of their life history. So just make the effort. Feeding birds is a great way. You can, when I think of birds in my yard, I think of birds that I see from my yard, and I've got a list of 120 species, 130 species of birds that I've seen from my yard. Birds flying over in the spring like snow geese.
Oh, that's
and
amazing.
they fly over, they could fly over downtown Keene as much as my yard. So then the second thing is, to get out with the people and to learn from them. And you can do that through New Hampshire Audubon, through the Harris Center, through a variety of programs that are run
Wonderful.
throughout the state.
Yeah, so that'll be a great start for people, and for myself, I'll start doing that. And thank you so much.
Oh,
for
you're welcome.
taking the time to meet with us. I know it's a busy time of year. I would think any time of year at the Harris Center is a busy time of year.
Sure.
You guys keep going, no matter what the season. And so get out there and look for some birds any time of year. It sounds like any time of year is a great time to look for birds, right in your own backyard, literally. So as we wind up here with Eric Masterson at the Harris Center, I just want to encourage everyone to look up the Harris Center online, take the short drive out to Hancock, and see what they have to offer, some beautiful trails. And also don't forget to visit us online, send us an email at inmybackyardch8@gmail.com. Let us know what you think of the show, if there's any topics you think we should cover that we haven't yet, or if you're interested in some aspect of nature in our backyard that we haven't talked about yet on the show. Let us know. And thanks again to the Harris Center for having us out here.